What if the Denver Broncos get the quarterback position right? What will that do to the team? We'll break it all down here on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos Country? Welcome into a brand new episode of Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you once again to everybody in Broncos Country, all the everydayers out there for tuning in, making us your first listen of the day every single day. Just a reminder, you can get this podcast for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. So make sure you do us a favor, hit that subscribe or that follow button down below so you never miss out on what's going on with your favorite team every single day, all year long, throughout the entire offseason, because Broncos Country, for the true fan, there's never an offseason. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter from Mile High Sports, joined alongside, as always, by Sayre Bedinger, site expert over there at predominantlyorange.com. The AFC has made a wide variety of moves so far in NFL free agency before the NFL draft. There's been some big moves, and we just got to ask ourselves the question here because it is important. What if the Denver Broncos get the quarterback position right? And maybe, just maybe, could the Houston Texans be an example of how Denver could approach things going forward? Which, if you would have said that 2 or 3 years ago, Sayre, I think everyone would be like, what are you talking about? If the Broncos can take the Houston Texans approach, well, now it seems like something that they are kind of embracing.
It's really interesting to me, Cody, to think that, I mean, obviously hitting on the quarterback is very rare in today's NFL. You have to get the right guy at the quarterback position. The Texans got the right guy, but remember before that, they were kind of the sad sacks of the NFL. I mean, they had the Deshaun Watson thing hanging over their whole head, and you had barely any picks in the 2021 NFL draft. And really, Cody, to me, like, as of the 2022 season, the Texans didn't really look like a team that was like, hey, remember they won that, I think it was the last game of the regular season, and everybody's like, oh my gosh, Lovie Smith just cost the Texans a chance to get whatever quarterback they want. And of course, then, CJ Stroud happens and things like that. But they were not a team that looked primed to welcome a rookie quarterback that was going to have the type of breakout season that we saw from CJ Stroud. I mean, there was even rumors that DeMeco Ryans didn't want to take their job as of the beginning of the offseason and ended up obviously taking it. But look, this is a Houston roster that, as bad as Broncos Country wants to make it sound like the Denver roster is, I don't remember many cornerstone pieces being on this Houston Texans team prior to last year. Now we know they got the second and third overall picks, and that ended up being offensive and defensive rookie of the year. Broncos don't have that kind of capital right now, but man, CJ Stroud was really the straw that stirred the drink. He was the one who turned things around there, along with great coaching. Go figure. And I think the Broncos have that. They've got the coaching. What could happen if they get the quarterback? I think this team's not as bad as a lot of people are saying.
Well, even before last year's NFL draft, even with the Texans positioning as to where they were, I think the common consensus, even after they drafted CJ Stroud, even after they drafted Will Anderson Jr., was, okay, hey, like, these are great pickups for the Texans. Okay, let's see what they look like here in a couple of years' time. We did not expect, I don't think anybody expected, I don't even think people in Houston expected them to be as good as they were last year. And Stroud obviously was a guy that I think was a great example, right? Because you go into the NFL preseason, and it kind of reminds me a little bit of Patrick Mahomes. Remember Mahomes' rookie year? He went to the preseason, all he was doing was throwing picks. Stroud was throwing some picks in the preseason. Everyone's like, oh my gosh, this guy's a bust. Like, that's why you really can't factor in preseason evaluation or how a quarterback or how your first team offense performs with a young guy. And now, obviously, Mahomes, household name, probably the best quarterback in the NFL. When it's all said and done, might have a case if he wins more rings to be the best quarterback in NFL history. And then you have CJ Stroud, who really came in. I mean, Sayre, and you're talking about it, a guy who raises the tide, right, to for all the ships inside the harbor there. You look at Nico Collins. Nico Collins was a big target, but wasn't as effective or as dangerous as he became last year with Stroud. Like, Stroud and him had such a good connection that Stroud knew where to throw the ball, where Nico Collins was going to get it. Then you introduce Tank Dell into the mix. You have Dalton Schultz as well. They didn't really have a good run game, though, Sayre, last year. And we thought Dameon Pierce was going to be an effective guy. Obviously, I think they had Singletary there. They'll be a little bit different this year. But what the Houston Texans did, and something that the Broncos have kind of done a little bit this offseason, last year and the year before, they went out and they just signed a bunch of dudes to 1 year, 2 year deals, nothing big. And then they're in a position, they got a bunch of role players and depth options where they are contributing. Kind of reminds me of where the Broncos have gone a little bit this offseason in some of their regards.
Yeah, the Broncos have signed a lot of free agents, not necessarily a ton from outside the organization, but they brought a lot of role players back. And I think that's critical when you're talking about adding a rookie quarterback to the mix. You've got to have a strong roster 1 through 53. It can't just be, well, the Broncos don't have an elite player at wide receiver. They don't have an elite player at X position or Y position. I mean, you have to have good role players. You have to have good, just like you said, with Nico Collins, he's the prime example. I mean, he was kind of considered, as far as third rounders go, he was considered on the trajectory to become a little bit of a bust there for Houston because they didn't have the quarterback position figured out. And he spent 2 years kind of just trying to, where does he fit in? His situation is so unique, so fascinating to me, but what was Houston comparing themselves to last year, Cody? That's, I think, the question that I think Broncos Country needs to ask. If comparing the Broncos right now to the Houston Texans is so unrealistic, what would Houston have been comparing themselves to a year ago? Saying, hey, in our situation, what's the best case scenario? And even if we do go above expectations this year, what is the best case scenario? You want to see good stuff from the rookie quarterback. You want to see good stuff from player development under a new head coach. And you figured with DeMeco Ryans coming in that it was going to be the longer term rebuild, but we've seen them accelerate that. And so that's what the Broncos, I think, have to be ready for here, Cody, is the fact that, like, if you get the right quarterback in place and you believe that guy is the right quarterback, man, you better be ready for this team to take maybe steps forward that you necessarily didn't expect. You got to be ready for the unexpected in a lot of ways if you're the Denver Broncos. And I think that's kind of what the Houston Texans showed us, is that you do the right things by putting the pieces around the quarterback. They've invested a lot through the years in the offensive line, the Laramie Tunsil trade, multiple other first and second round picks on that O-line. They've invested there. They had, nothing higher than a third round selection at the wide receiver position, right? I mean, maybe a second rounder with John Mechie, but he wasn't really contributing anything. So it's like you just, I guess there's a lack of expectation amongst the Broncos fan base because of the fact that they may be getting the 4th or 5th quarterback that's coming off the board in this draft. And so I just think it's unfair to compare to the Texans, but at the same time, you can take the same approach and have similar results.
Yeah, you can draw parallels from it too. And so the premise of what you're saying is, like, expect, have the expectation that, hey, the Broncos, if they get the quarterback position right, could take a step the way that CJ Stroud did, becoming a QB in Houston. But also at the same time, if it doesn't happen right away in year one, what does the trajectory look like? Do you have a team around this player that is built to maybe sustain, right? That can build upon his strengths and just needs a little bit more time to develop chemistry with one another. I think that's the lens in which Broncos Country may have to approach this thing. And look, there is no guarantees in the NFL. That's why we sit here and we talk about every angle. Could this work out? What if it doesn't work out? Like, that's just where we're at because we don't have a crystal ball here. But Broncos Country, we want to know your thoughts on the parallels that maybe the Broncos can draw from the Houston Texans in terms of how they've built their team so far in free agency. Can they carry that over into the NFL draft despite not having a 2nd and 3rd overall picks back-to-back in this year's draft? We'll see where Denver is at there. Let us know here if you're watching or listening to Locked On Broncos. But one thing we also need to take a look at too is, does having a quarterback in place, the guy who is the guy, does that make team building easier? That's something that Sayre Bedinger and myself will break down on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's Locked On Broncos podcast is brought to you by our friends over there at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything that you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors, they've got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts that you need at the prices that you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Once again, that's ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers.
Does having a quarterback on your roster really make it easier to build the team? I mean, we hear all these certain things about, man, having the franchise quarterback in place. That is everything for an NFL team, but does it actually make it easier for team building? We're seeing some dramatic differences in examples with the Houston Texans, as we just mentioned, and also the Buffalo Bills, things sort of falling apart there with their roster. So does it actually make things easier for your GM and head coach? We're going to discuss that on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, but want to say thank you to every single one of you that makes Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Cody and I appreciate every single one of you so much for tuning in wherever and however, free and available on all podcast platforms, as well as on YouTube, where you can watch the show. And, Cody, I think right here is the crux of the discussion this offseason. Is Broncos Country so worried about the current state of the roster, which understandably so. I mean, the team has lacked draft capital the last handful of years, not many top 50 picks on the team. So that's understandable. But does getting the quarterback position right this offseason, does that dramatically change how much easier it's going to be for Sean Payton and George Payton to build this roster up?
I feel like it can definitely make things easier now while you don't have the quarterback. The moves that you make in free agency and the draft make the idea of team building very, very interesting, right? Because ideally, if you don't have the quarterback, well, how do you build a team around a potential guy to where he's going to come in and he's going to have pieces around him? I think that Denver, for the most part, has done a solid job here, right? And we made the comparison to the Houston Texans, their wide receiver core that they have. Look, I look at guys like Cortland Sutton, Tim Patrick, guys who have proven experience and contributions at the NFL level. That was a little bit more than what the Texans had, previously going into last year. Denver's gotten more out of those guys than Houston had previously. Now you add Marvin Mims, who we all know has flash potential, has shown demonstrations, despite not being utilized as much as he should have by this coaching staff, has the opportunity to become a big play wide receiver for the Broncos downfield. And then you add in a guy like Josh Reynolds, who can contribute as a playmaker, as a third down option for you. It's not going to be your number one or number two wide receiver, but man, if you are expecting him to be a wide receiver 3 or wide receiver 4 and step up in big situations, he is a guy that has proven he can be capable of doing that. So I think when you talk about receiving talent around whoever the quarterback may be, I think Denver has some good options. Tight end, you're really trying to hope that Greg Dulcich stays healthy, because if he does, all right, there is a guy who can have a big impact. The running game, okay, how is Javonte Williams going to be this year? How's Samaje Perine, Jaleel McLaughlin? Are they going to add in the NFL draft? I think if Denver can get the run game going, right, and this is a big if here, because right now we don't know what that's going to look like. I think that Denver's offense at least has key guys on the offensive line still around. You do have questions in the long term about left tackle. You do have questions about who your long-term center is going to be. Is that guy on your roster right now? Maybe, maybe not. But I think Denver's offense has enough pieces around them right now to surprise people this upcoming season. But it really depends on how you get the quarterback position right. But I do think if you have the quarterback, it makes it easier to build your team in other areas, because if Denver has the belief that their offense is good as is, they have the pieces long-term on the offensive line, they have skill players around them that they can continue to build and develop, well, then it allows them to maybe build in other areas of this team. I think there's some great examples around the NFL, and I think Kansas City is a great place to start.
Kansas City is a great place to start. I mean, Patrick Mahomes is probably the most unrealistic example of, hey, you hit on a guy like this, well, you're not getting a Patrick Mahomes in all likelihood. But
No.
look, the reality is that Kansas City, they built their roster extremely well and in different ways, right? They built around Patrick Mahomes, but they also built a defense to be able to have his back, like we saw this past season when the Kansas City offense looked pretty sluggish through a majority of the regular season. That defense was really carrying the team, getting them extra possessions, making up for mistakes that the offense had made. Not to say that I'm not trying to diminish the greatness of Kansas City's, Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, all that, but they did struggle offensively. And that's just the reality. But Kansas City's defense, I mean, the guys that they've hit on in rounds 1 through 7 of the draft and in undrafted free agency, I mean, it's remarkable. They've done such a great job. General manager Brett Veach has just built that team tremendously over the course of the years. And they've found ways to get around the salary cap. They found ways to make sure, hey, we lose Tyreek Hill, we're not losing any real offensive production. Remember that not this past season, but the year before that, the 2022 season, after they trade Tyreek, their offense basically took a step forward. So they've got ways that they go about it, that's just like it does make it easier to build around a quarterback that, like, this is the quarterback is the gravity in which everything else goes towards him. Everything else is drawn towards him. We want to put this wide receiver with the quarterback. We feel like he could work well with this guy. We feel like, we need this piece on the offensive line to protect the quarterback. We feel like we need to upgrade the running game in order to supplement what this quarterback is struggling with. Everything is easier, in my opinion, when you have the quarterback in place, not just from a roster building standpoint, but from knowing that you can compete if you fill certain spots when you've got the right guy in the quarterback chair.
Well, and the challenge that Kansas City has also faced, if we're drawing comparisons or parallels here, is that, look, they gave Patrick Mahomes a mega extension, which, look, he deserves that. But they have experienced like the pitfalls of, okay, hey, you have a lot of money dedicated to your offense. You have a lot of money dedicated to some defensive guys. Now Chris Jones, with the big deal that he's got, they've had to let some players go. Like, they've had to let some players walk. Now, I don't think that they're players that they felt like, hey, like, we can't live without this guy. Like, they traded away L'Jarius Sneed, who had a really terrific season at cornerback this year, but they've got obviously they got Duffy or McDuffie from Washington, who's really emerged to be a very talented player, has made some plays for them. On the back end, they have some guys that are also contributing, but they are allowing, like, you have to move on from some guys. And remember when the Chiefs made that one startling decision after they lost the Super Bowl to move on from their veteran starting offensive tackles, and we're like, what are they doing? Well, there was a plan in place. There was a vision. And while at the moment you look at that and you're like, why did they do that? Okay, what's the plan? Well, they went out and they beefed it up. They've got other guys in place, and obviously their interior offensive line is strong, but we have seen at times Kansas City become a little bit more human because of the fact that they have had to let some guys go. Last year, I mean, outside of Travis Kelce, look, he was their main option for them in the receiving game. But aside from that, they were looking for other guys to step up at the wide receiver position. And man, was it so inconsistent for them. The fact that they were able to make it to the playoffs, make it to the Super Bowl, and win the way that they did, that right there is impressive to the team building aspect that I think that Brett Veach and the Chiefs have done. And look, I know that there's going to be some fans who are listening to us talk about the Chiefs. Why are you talking about the Chiefs? Why are you building them up? The reality is you have to look at where teams have done a really good job. And our whole idea of this episode here is what happens if you get the quarterback position right. How can you build a team around it? I think the Chiefs are probably the greatest example right now in the NFL as to, if you get that right, here's what it can do. And look, the Broncos are still a ways off. There's still a lot of things they need to get right, specifically quarterback. But if they do it, it gets them one step closer, I think, closing away that gap that you currently see right now in the AFC that is being flooded with younger quarterbacks. And I think names that are going to be around for quite some time here in the National Football League that Denver is going to have to deal with.
And let's maybe look at one more example, Cody, that I really like right now is the Green Bay Packers, the way that they've been going about team building. Of course, the majority of what general manager Brian Gutekunst does to build that roster happens through the NFL draft. But look at what happened right after the year after Jordan Love's breakout season. They go out and they do something super uncharacteristic. They spend a bunch of money in the first wave of free agency. You go pick up Josh Jacobs and just straight up replace Aaron Jones the same day, basically. And then you go sign Xavier McKinney to play the safety position, two position groups that aren't necessarily thought to be positions that right now you want to go pay running backs. You want to go pay safeties. The market is very team friendly at those positions, but the Packers went out and attacked those guys. Why? Because they'd done such a good job in the NFL draft at finding receivers before Jordan Love's breakout. They went and they drafted guys like, Jaden Reed, and they drafted Christian Watson, and you got Romeo Doubs, and you got all these other guys. You draft the tight ends the same year that you're planning on having Jordan Love be your full-time starter. So they got Tucker Kraft in the third round and Luke Musgrave in the second round. They had built through the offensive line through the years. Adam Stenavich, who the Broncos missed out on in 2022 when Nathaniel Hackett came over, he's been so good at developing young offensive linemen at every turn of the NFL draft. And you believe in that player development, right? That's the thing, like that with the Broncos right now, Cody, that's the one thing that I think is most translatable to any of these other teams that are having success is you've got a coaching staff that you can believe in the player development. And we saw that the offensive line upgraded all across the board last year under Sean Payton and Zach Strief. I don't know how many players were really worse this past year under Sean Payton and his coaching staff compared to the year prior. So you trust in that coaching staff, you trust in their ability to develop players and get them in the position to succeed. And you look at these teams around the league and you see when the quarterback position hits, boom, then you can start being aggressive in other areas.
outside of the Houston Texans and the Kansas City Chiefs, there are some other teams around the league who have shown examples of if you get the quarterback position right, you could be on a path of linear growth. We'll see if the Broncos can do the same. We'll break down those teams here. Today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's Locked On Broncos podcast is brought to you by our friends over there at Robinhood. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar that you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at Robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer. What are some other examples around the National Football League from teams who have gotten the quarterback position right and how it has maybe elevated them from a team-building aspect or has put them in the conversation of contending or being on the path toward contention? We'll break that down here on today's brand new episode of Locked On Broncos. Real quick, we just want to say thank you so much to everybody in Broncos Country. If you're enjoying the show on YouTube, make sure you also take us with you on the go wherever you get your podcasts in audio format. We have you covered every single day here, Locked On Broncos, which you can get on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and other places as well here. Sayre, we've talked about the Texans. We've talked about the Chiefs being examples of getting the quarterback position right. And obviously the whole theme for today's show, if Denver gets the position right, what can they do? There's some other examples around there around the National Football League, specifically inside the AFC North as well here as we look at the Baltimore Ravens. What was the outlook like for them before they got Lamar Jackson?
Yeah, this is a great question because a lot of folks are saying, well, you can't compare to the Houston Texans. You can't compare to the Kansas City Chiefs. Those teams weren't picking fourth or fifth in line at the quarterback position. Well, how about in 2018 when the Baltimore Ravens moved back into the very end, the last pick of the first round to select Lamar Jackson, who was an afterthought in the quarterback class that included Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold, Josh Rosen, Josh Allen, all these other guys that were supposed to be so much better in the NFL than Lamar Jackson. The Baltimore Ravens, Cody, let's go back in time just a little bit here, because the Baltimore Ravens weren't just they weren't just this awesome powerhouse of a team that was like, yeah, let's throw in Lamar Jackson. No, they were a struggling team. In 2015, they went 5-11. And then in 2016, 8-8, 2017, 9-7. So you could see there was some progression there, which go figure. The Broncos in 2022, they went 5-12. And in 2023, they went 8-9. So you get the quarterback position right, and immediately they became a 10-win team with Lamar Jackson as the primary starter. So to me, that shows that if you get the position right, it doesn't necessarily matter. I mean, the Broncos are already on a positive trajectory. They've improved by 3 wins this past season compared to where they were with Nathaniel Hackett. Now you factor in, okay, you don't necessarily have to get the first quarterback as long as you get the quarterback that you want, the quarterback that you believe you can build around. Then you can have organizational success. You build an offense around that player, which we know Sean Payton will and has done. I think, Cody, it's shaping up for the Broncos to be kind of a similar success story.
When I think you look at some other examples, Joe Burrow and the Cincinnati Bengals, like Joe Burrow is a phenomenal quarterback, right? And I think the one question that we had for Joe, which he's kind of answered a little bit, is despite the fact that throughout his NFL career, that man has been hit, he's been bloodied, he's been battered, he's been injured at times, he has still elevated that team. And look, they've got really good receiving weapons around him. They had a really good run game with Joe Mixon, and they had former Bengal, now current Bronco, Samaje Perine in the mix. And then obviously we saw what it was like when Joe Burrow went down with an injury. They weren't as dangerous, though. Jake Browning had a little bit of fury and a little bit of media hype to him a little bit as well, to the point where there's been Broncos fans here on this channel that have been saying go get Jake Browning. I'm like, wait a minute. Are we really just saying, hey, go get Jake Browning just because he had a little bit of flash in a pan there without long-term sustainability? Then you also look at the Buffalo Bills before Josh Allen. I mean, you can make the argument here about the Miami Dolphins before Tua Tagovailoa, even though the Tua, I would say his NFL career has been kind of up and down a little bit. I remember his rookie season, Vic Fangio unleashed the hounds on Tua in Denver. I mean, it was brutal to the point Ryan Fitzpatrick had to come into the game to try to lead a game-winning drive where former Bronco Justin Simmons had the game-winning interception. But Tua this past season really lit it up for the Miami Dolphins, even though that they kind of sputtered at the end there and really couldn't get anything going against the Chiefs in a very, very cold game. Those guys have, I mean, these teams have been examples of, hey, not having really an answer at quarterback beforehand. I know Tua is probably the one guy here on this list that we're talking about that there's still probably a question mark. Like if you talk to the Dolphins fans, even they themselves are going to say, like, they don't even know if Tua is going to be the guy long-term. Some of them might even be already talking about Dak Prescott and free agency next year. So there are examples around the league outside of the Texans and outside of the Chiefs that we have highlighted here as well. And maybe you make the argument about the Indianapolis Colts when Peyton Manning was kind of like his question, like, is he going to ever return? They go out and they get Andrew Luck. And now there's kind of questions as well about maybe Anthony Richardson. But I mean, there's some parallels around the NFL that I think Broncos fans absolutely should pay attention to. Are we saying it's going to happen with Denver? No, but we're saying that it is possible. And there is a demonstrated track record from other teams around the NFL that have proven so.
Yeah, and I think the Colts are really a great example of, hey, they were terrible in 2022. I know they came into Denver and beat the Broncos with Matt Ryan as their quarterback, but they were kind of clinging to all these different players that, they needed a complete overhaul, and they did exactly that, right? They brought in Shane Steichen as the head coach, and he brings in a guy that he knows and is familiar with in Gardner Minshew to be the floor raiser at the quarterback position. And then you draft Anthony Richardson at 4th overall, where a lot of people, I think, were shocked by that decision because he was so raw coming out of Florida. And I don't know if people were certain that he was going to be worth a top 5 selection. Well, not only did Richardson play extremely well before he got injured, but then when he went down for the season, that Colts team that was so pathetic in 2022 ended up contending for a playoff spot all year in the AFC South. They won 9 games last year. So that's, to me, it's like, how do we figure the Broncos are worse in 2024 than they were in 2022 when they won 5 games with, remember, the ghost of Russell Wilson at quarterback and Nathaniel Hackett as the head coach? And you fire your coach or at the butt end of the season, and Russ is injured and playing injured, and you have backups coming in, and I don't see how the Broncos are possibly worse. I know that there's betting sites that have the Broncos over under this year at 5.5 wins, which you and I've talked about. It just seems ridiculous to me that there's no way that this Broncos team is worse in 2024 than what we saw in 2022. I mean, there's just no possible way. Sean Payton and his staff raised the floor way too high. So, Cody, if I were a betting man, I'd be smashing the over as quickly as I possibly could on those 5.5 wins, because there ain't no way the Broncos are losing 12 games in 2024.
Yeah, and the whole idea that Sean Payton's just going to punt away on the season, I think, is a ridiculous notion, because being around Sean, Sayre, and I can tell you this, like, this guy, he's ultra competitive. Like, this is a guy who doesn't like to lose. And I guarantee you, like, he's told us stories how family game nights, he still doesn't like to lose when they're playing game night stuff. And he's driving around, even after a win, he's driving around the parking lot looking for a place to park, going out to celebrate a win. And he's unhappy. Like, do you think that is in Sean's DNA to say, like, you know what, we're going to just stink in 2024, just to have a better pick in 2025? That's not in Sean Payton's DNA. And he's going to do whatever he can to get this team into the best position possible. Will that lead to more wins? Maybe, maybe not. There's nothing guaranteed. I think we always have to base our conversations and our premise of it here on the show by saying, we're not trying to sell you anything, Broncos Country. We're trying to talk about, if the Broncos get it right, what can it look like? And with the, I think, terms and the contingencies we've talked about, like Denver making the moves that they have this offseason, a lot have been head scratching, kind of similar to what the Chiefs did after they lost in the Buccaneers Super Bowl. They made a lot of questionable decisions, moving on from key guys. Something that the Broncos, look, they didn't go to the Super Bowl, but they moved on from some key guys, and we were sitting here like, whoa, did they really do that? And then the moves that they've made, can they be in a better path, better trajectory going forward? That's the question. It's not impossible. So we're going to keep monitoring that all throughout the entire offseason. And if Denver gets the quarterback position right, or if they get the guy in the draft, we'll analyze every single angle possible here on Locked On Broncos. But with that said, Broncos Country, we want you to enjoy your weekend here. this week. Sayre Bedinger, myself, for Monday's episode of the show. For all you everydayers out there, we're going to sit down and we're going to do a live interactive mock draft. We can't wait to break it all down with everybody in Broncos country. We'll see you on Monday for a brand new episode of the show.